we are talking about, among other things, the death of Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the last president of the Soviet Union, who died Tuesday. I was going to start with you, Bob, because you were in Russia working as a journalist in 1987. You got an early copy of Gorbachev's book, Perestroika, New Thinking for a Country in the World. You wrote a review of this book, and the review was called From Moscow, First Report of an Unprecedented Call for Change, the Gorbachev Manifesto. That was published in 1987. And you open your review by writing, when Mikhail Gorbachev comes to the United States next month for his summit conference with President Reagan, he will convey the main theme of this book, the Soviet Union is now in the grip of a new realism about its domestic crisis and world priorities. And you close your review writing, the mood here in Moscow has become considerably more optimistic on U.S.-Soviet relations since the book was written in late summer. Now senior officials in the foreign ministry, the military, and on the Communist Party Central Committee talk confidently of a profoundly important and impending reversal of the nuclear arms race. According to these sources, the summit will witness not only a ban on intermediate-range nuclear weapons, but also a possible agreement in principle on the destruction of half of the strategic nuclear arsenal in return for strict U.S. observance of the ABM treaty. If this second deal goes through, it may well mean that the Cold War is on its way out and that the new era of peace and new politics that Gorbachev writes about is truly at hand. That was 1987 that you wrote that. By 1991... the Cold War was over. The Soviet Union no longer existed. But was peace at hand at this point?
You can have peace if you really want it, to sort of take the old Beatle slogan, war is over. We didn't want it. The fact is, it was really quite amazing. I was an exchange correspondent. You left it out of my introduction, but I spent 29 years at the Los Angeles Times.
Oh, right.
And in 1987, I was a national correspondent, but they sent me over to Moscow. I worked in Moscow News, which had editions in about 30 languages. And at that time, I secured one of the first, I think the first copy that anyone had around circulating. And I read it. I read it in the old National Hotel, the same hotel Lenin had been in during the revolution, the historic place. And I was blown away. And I knew a lot about Gorbachev and what he'd done already. But this is where we had a formal manifesto about perestroika, the restructuring, fundamental restructuring of Soviet communism, to make it accountable, to make it a mixed economy, to make it respect individual rights and so forth, and combined with the notion of glasnost, which was free expression and so forth. And he felt the two had to go in hand. If the people could not criticize the government, if the government could not be replaced. So it was kind of a social democratic ideal or fantasy, the very kind of people who had on the social democratic side who had run Germany, France at different points, and even the Labour Party in England. Suddenly, this was Gorbachev. And there were plenty of people that I ran into. I was there for months at the time who thought, wow, he's selling out, and what is he getting in return? And he's challenging nationalism. He's actually challenging a certain patriotism. And it was almost as if this was now, maybe people don't know Henry Wallace or even Roosevelt. He was talking about the can-do society. And what happened was, and Reagan himself, Reagan is somebody I did interview at some length over the years, even before he was governor, and Nixon, who I interviewed a lot after he was in office. And Nixon was sounding at that time the same themes. War is out because of nuclear weapons, because of their destruction. You cannot pursue your goals with military means. You have to have an accommodation. It's why Nixon went to China and negotiated with Mao Zedong. And Nixon, of course, had been involved earlier with Eisenhower's opening the detente as vice president. And so there was an understanding, and that's what Gorbachev's book was all about, that there has to be an accommodation, that the Cold War made no sense. There was also a profound evaluation of the failure of the command economy. He said, Marx, people talked about socialism. It was a good ideal, but they didn't tell us how to get there. And we have failed. We produce all this steel, all this grain, and everything. We can't feed our people. We can't make our things run. And this has to be a fundamental change. So, for anybody seriously interested in human values, advancing the interests of ordinary people, it should have been embraced. Instead, the war ideology took over in the United States, beginning with the neoconservatives, who then were on the Republican side. They now are safely in the Biden State Department. No, we have to have a Cold War. We have to have a bigger military. We have to humble them. And so they betrayed what Reagan had really promised. They betrayed the idea of really getting rid of a lot of these weapons. Even the first President Bush thought you could cut the military budget by 30% at first and even more. Well, they rallied against all that. And instead, they said you can't make an accommodation with this communism the way Nixon did with China. We have to humiliate, overthrow, and get rid of him. And they made Gorbachev the enemy. And they found this hopeless drunk of Yeltsin, and they were going to be able to manipulate him. And the problem is everything was falling apart. They got rid of Gorbachev, but everything was falling apart. And then in desperation, and I remember this because I was writing about this all the time and making trips and so forth. Putin was a good bureaucrat in St. Petersburg working with the reform crowd, Sobchak and others. His great virtue was that he was sober, that he could show up for work. And so the band was beating, Yeltsin has to hire Putin. And Yeltsin reaches out to St. Petersburg, brings Putin in, and Putin delivers. The guy shows up, he works, he does, exercise and judo and all this stuff. And things are getting back to some normal, right? And then what happens, and it happens everywhere where we claim we want reform, and I'll let Chris take over now, but what happens is every time we claim we want a strong reformer, when the reformer gets serious, it happened in Iran with Mossadegh, it happened in India with Nehru, it happened anywhere in the world, and it happened with Putin. You got a reformer? Well, the reformer says, sure, I want to reform, but my first obligation is to my people. They have to come out winning. The women can't be prostitutes and send them over to Saudi Arabia. Everybody can't go get drunk on a high level. We can't have the tycoons making all the money. We have to be able to deliver a society. We have to respect our old values, our history, and so forth. They have their own nationalism that doesn't go away in the Federation any more than it goes away in the Ukraine or someplace. And suddenly, oh, wait a minute, this Putin can't be controlled. And everybody forgets Putin was the guy who defeated the Communist Party. There was real concern of those who wanted change that the Communist Party would be the alternative to Gorbachev. You get rid of him, get the hard line in, the military will back him, and so forth. So Putin was the ideal reformer who can make things work, but certainly was no communist.